Worship is such a good time to get our hearts in the right place, our heads in the right place after, I can only imagine what all of us have gone through throughout the week. It was end of the financial year for me, so very stressful week. So I'm so happy to have these kind of layers of stress and worry peeled off through the worship. So praise God. Thank you, guys. Also, in a similar way, it's interesting because we're leading up to Easter. And so there's a certain kind of preparation for us to worship this highlight event, right? This amazing time where we celebrate this incredible game-changing paradox that Jesus totally changed the course of history. That you take a guy and you kill him on a cross, and he redeems the whole of humanity forever and ever. And growing up, I remember this was just my absolute favorite celebration, festival, holiday, what have you. And Sunday, of course, is that glory where we celebrate the resurrection, and that always gets such a spotlight because that is where we really celebrate the victory. But as I've gotten older, I've kept retreating back more days to appreciate the days prior to Sunday. And of course, we've been doing this series and leading up to Easter on the cross. And that is the pain of Friday. And such a incredible suffering that Jesus went through. And we sung about it to some degree to kind of, at some point, wrap our heads around that all. And today we're even going to go a little earlier on Friday, late Thursday night, early Friday morning. We're going to look at that time prior to the cross, those key moments when Jesus went just prior to giving himself over. And when he went to this garden in Gethsemane, and the intense time he spent there. And I was so fortunate a couple of years ago, I got to actually visit Israel and Jerusalem, and I got to go to Gethsemane. And wow, just heavy, just to see in the distance the temple where all the things that had gone down, right? And to know also where he was going to be led to be crucified, and to see this place that he had retreated to hide out, to be quiet, and to know that, troops were sent, a mob was sent to capture him. So the verse that we're going to focus on today, Danny's going to help us with a reading here in Matthew 26. If you want to turn there and follow, it'll be on the screen as well. But Danny, thank you.
Yeah, the passages, Matthew chapter 26, verses 47 to 54. Matthew chapter 26, verses 47 to 54. While he was still speaking, Judas, one of the 12, arrived. With him was a large crowd armed with swords and clubs, sent from the chief priests and the elders of the people. Now the betrayer had arranged a signal with them. The one I kiss is the man, arrest him. Going at once to Jesus, Judas said, Greetings, Rabbi, and kissed him. Jesus replied, Do what you came for, friend. Then the men stepped forward, seized Jesus, and arrested him. With that, one of Jesus' companions reached for his sword, drew it out, and struck the servant of the high priest, cutting off his ear. Put your sword back in its place, Jesus said to him, for all who draw the sword will die by the sword. Do you think I cannot call on my Father, and he will at once put at my disposal more than 12 legions of angels? But how then would the scriptures be fulfilled that say it must happen in this way?
Thanks, Danny. Yeah, so the thing that we're going to talk about today is actually this fork in the road, this choice that Jesus gets to make in the moment, to fight back, or even to run away, or to take the path of the cross. And it's very interesting. We've been focusing on this subject of the cross, and of course, there's a lot of symbolism, and symbols are quite powerful, right? And the cross is, in fact, is that symbol that is so common, that has now traveled the world, and it in many ways represents us, right? We can see these icon. You see this thing, you see a cross, and what do you think when you see a cross, right? Does that give you pride? Like, I'm part of that club, I'm part of that group. What do non-Christians see? You know, what do Muslims think when they see the cross? What is the message, that the stereotype that comes to their mind? What does this symbol represent today in the world? Because back in the day, it represented something very, very distinct, right? I mean, first, before Jesus, it represented complete terror, all right? Complete horror, reserved for criminals, betrayers of the empire, etc., right? And then even when Jesus came, it began to represent something different, right? The ultimate, most incredible, intense, deep, profound type of love. That love that takes you to give everything in sacrifice. That's what that cross represented, right? Now today, when we say and we think of love, what do we use? We use a different symbol, a different icon. This is how we think of love, right? And why is that? Why do we use that symbol? Because when you have those warm fuzzies for someone, your heart beats, right? Do you remember those days, the first time you met that special someone? And, oh, wow, right? And the biology kicks in, right? It's that romantic kind of love, right? And you might even feel that way for a deep friendship, right? That's a different kind of love, right? And you guys know the English language is just so, the poverty of words for love is a tragedy, right? We use that same word for these two kinds of love. For the first love I talked about that represents the cross, we use love for pizza, right? So, total injustice. But we've come to think of love as that flittery, warm, fuzzy feeling, right? We put it in these nice little statements, like we can put an I and a you there. And this is a cute friendship kind of thing. Yeah, Joel? You want to? There we go. I love you. I heart you, right? I get warm fuzzies when you are near me. Okay? Does anyone ever put this next one up there? Have you guys ever sent that message? I love you so much, I would give it all. I would die on the cross for you. Right? Now that is the love that we are called to. That is that agape love. Eros is the romantic one. Philia is that friendship, deep friendship one. But agape is the love that's specific. That's the Greek word that talks about this love that we should have, that we're called to have, that Jesus had, and that is represented on that cross. And we cannot look at the way that Jesus died. It's not an accident that he died on a cross. It's not an accident that this is our symbol. And we cannot look at that, how he died, the way that he ended up. If it was just about the Son of God somehow needs to die for this supernatural transaction to occur where we're redeemed, right? That could be arranged in any number of ways, all right? But it happened this way. Do we think that's an accident? I don't think it's an accident. I think it's very, very well thought out by God Almighty, right? This was planned, and it was a consequence. The how he died was a consequence of the way he lived, right? And so to understand what we're talking about right now, and even that final choice between the sword and the cross, we have to go back and look at how Jesus lived, right? And it's very clear that he lived a life that was characterized by intervening on behalf of the weak, by stepping in where there was injustice, right? By stepping in where there was violence, with love, always with love for everyone, perpetrator, victim, love, right? And we can go back and we can look at how he first expressed and how the biblical record helps us come to know Jesus, right? And we get to know a lot of his actions, and we'll talk about some of those. But this beautiful Sermon on the Mount highlights kind of a summary sermon of Jesus' message. You know, we don't think this was one sermon. This was the message he would give. In fact, we know it in Matthew as Sermon on the Mount. In Luke, it's on a plane. Sermon on a plane, on a flat place. Not. I don't think he was flying anywhere at the time, right? So what does he say when he announces his ministry, when he talks about his program? Well, first of all, he has a crowd of people there, but he's really speaking to the disciples, right? I think the crowd was on Zoom at the time, right? And the disciples were there present. He was speaking to them. And he goes through a list of things. And remember, who are these people that are following him out to the wilderness, outside of where it's convenient and just passerby? They've tracked him down. They followed him. The disciples have already given up career, family. They're following him. What kind of crowd is this? Right? These are your Ivy League, top-notch leaders of society, pillars of society? No. In the best terms, it's a riffraff, right? Those guys, men with long hair, you know, things like that, the shady people of the world, fishermen, tax collectors, zealots, all the riffraff, okay? So, and this was compounded because you guys know the way that the Jews were living at that time was it was a tough time for riffraff. Always is a tough time for riffraff, let me tell you. But at this time in particular, the Jews had obsessed with that purity code and with the rules of the law, and all that religion weighed so heavy that anyone who wasn't living in a very isolated, pristine kind of way, just they could never hope to ever be right with God. That was the weight that you just got pummeled with. You are not ever going to be clean, not with that profession, right? Not at that income level. You could never ever be holy and right with God. And what is Jesus' message to that group of people? I don't have it up here, but please, if you can't remember it off the top, go ahead and meditate on Matthew 5 later today. He starts off with the blesseds, right? The Beatitudes as they're called. Blessed are the poor. Blessed are the meek. Blessed are those who suffer, those who are persecuted, right? Goes through this laundry list of the people who definitely would not be considered the blessed, right? He was talking to that group and said, you guys are the blessed ones. And you can imagine what that did to a bunch of riffraff. How the shoulders maybe went back a little, right? From that hunched down, defeated kind of posture to, man, I might just be something, right? And then what did he do? He took the old school code and he said, you guys are so blessed and so privileged that you will stand up to a higher code. Forget this, you cannot comply with the purity code because you're all dirty and all of that, right? Because you're the wrong kind of people. I'm holding you to more. Those guys talk about not killing, you can't even hate, right? Those guys talk about no adultery, you won't even lust, right? He keeps taking them to a higher standard, raising them up to saying the holy ones, the ones that are the purest, will be you, right? And that's culminated here. And all of these start with the you have heard it said, you have heard it said. And that you have heard it said would be Torah, right? It would be the law, and it would be common knowledge around. And in verse 38 now, he says, you have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you, do not resist the evildoer, but whoever strikes you on the right cheek, turn the other to him as well. And if someone wants to sue you and take your tunic, give him your coat also. And if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with him 2. Give to the one who asks you, do not reject the one who wants to borrow from you. Right? So this is something that the victims suffered. Right? This isn't something, by the way, I think a lot of you probably know this eye for an eye. We use it as children as like a license for violence, right? Like you did this to me, so I get to do that to you. Right? That's how we think of eye for eye. But you guys know eye for eye was a restraint. When that law was given, that was restraining people, because back then it was, you cut out my eye, I'm killing your whole family. Right? And especially if I'm more powerful, the powerful guy will win. So eye for an eye was a big constraint. And it was considered very enlightened, right? Only you take a hand off, okay, I can only take your hand off. That's restraint. That's very kind of enlightened justice, right? Now, when he says this, when he gives these examples, whoever strikes you on the right cheek, right? Whoever sues you for your garment, right? Whoever makes you walk well. Those are not things that would happen to non-riffraff. Okay? These are things that the riffraff would suffer. The oppressed would suffer. He is speaking to a group of victims, right? And he's saying, even there, I will hold you to a higher standard. You will not do that back, right? And here he embeds a very tricky, I think it's the first known case of jujitsu that we've seen in the history of time, right? He includes a very sneaky thing here where these remedies that he's talking about, which sound to us, turn the other cheek, give him your other garment, walk 2 miles. They're very sneaky because it's not a dejected, you trample over me more. And unfortunately, we don't have time to get into the depth of all this. But these are ways that you turn the oppressor, that oppressor's energy on himself, right? If he strikes you on the right cheek, that would have been a demeaning backhanded slap. You can do it with your neighbor. You can see, how do I get the right cheek hit, right? The open hand with the right one will get the left, right? And you shouldn't be doing things with that left hand. That left hand is for unclean stuff, okay? This is Jewish. This is the reality at the time. Right? The hit that someone would have got on the right cheek would have been a demeaning backslap of someone superior to someone inferior. Right? To a slave. Now you turn the left cheek to me. What are my alternatives? What do I have to do? I either use the unclean, or now I have to hit you like an equal and lower myself to your level or raise you to my level. Right? So this isn't this walk all over me passivity that we have come to think of it. Right? In the tunic one, with the rope, the clothing, nakedness was shameful, but not for the person who was naked, the people who saw the naked person. The people who made that person naked are the ones that should be ashamed. So you can imagine that guy taking, okay, I'll take the one garment, and then you're, no, don't give me that one. No, and now you're holding the guy's garments. This naked guy is there for everyone to see, and you're holding his garments. Who's the bad guy? Who's in trouble now? Right? The Roman soldiers had by law the ability to conscript and make people carry their junk for them, right? Their equipment and their gear and everything. But because of the abuses and that caused too much rebellion, they had limited this. The army could just take 1 mile. And then they had to switch to another person. Now you're voluntarily going more. Now that soldier is like, oh my goodness, I'm in trouble. Right? So all of these things were things where they were saying, where Jesus said to the people, you can be a victim, but you're going to be a victim that fights back very sneaky, very creatively. No violence, no uprising. You're just going to use all their bad energy, all their bad juju, and give it right back to them and embarrass them with that, right? So this is a confrontational Jesus, right? Who is not going to stand for oppression, who is going to build up the victims and the oppressed and give them power that they didn't even know they had, right? And then right after that, after all that building up, and what happens when we get built up and someone tells us, you guys are so awesome and you're the best and everything like that, right? We start to get a big head, and sometimes this happens on a national level, right? And then what happens is very quickly you start looking at the other guys and you can dehumanize them, right? You can think of them as lesser individuals. Yeah, we are the blessed. Us, the riffraff. And all those elite guys, they are monsters. Right? But what is the next thing that Jesus says? Love your enemies. Sorry, I lost my place. Totally lost my place. Yeah. No, this isn't a trick. This is just an aptitude straight away here. Yeah, it's on the screen if you guys can read it. Yeah? I can see it, but it's too small for me to see. Okay, you have heard it said, okay, there we go, an eye for an eye. You have heard it said that love your neighbor, right? And hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemy and pray for those who persecute you, so that you may be like your Father in heaven. Since he causes the sun to rise on the evil and good, and sends rain on the righteous and unrighteous. Right? So, whoever is your enemy, whoever is committing violence upon you, you guess what? You get to love them too. I hold you to that higher standard. And Jesus references God himself, which tells us God also loves those people as much as the injustice he does not love. Right? So we see that Jesus here is addressing the victim as well as the offender or the perpetrator. Right? And he doesn't leave any room for non-love. Right? Both of these guys are equally loved in a way that they would have never felt it before. Right? Now, there's two groups here, and so we see, there's a victim and an offender, but there's always another group of people. Always, let's say 99% of the time. Sometimes things happen super in secret. But usually there's a third party, who is the bystander, right? That bystander is usually witnessing this offense, right? This violence. And here I'm talking about, it could be a one-off thing or it could be a systemic thing, right? Jesus is addressing all of that. But there's usually that bystander, and usually what does that bystander do? Glad it's not me, right? And the numbers are crazy. Look at this image on the screen, right? Usually there's a very small number of victims and perpetrators, but there's a huge number of bystanders, right? And in fact, we know that the more bystanders there are, the less likely any one of them is to intervene. Right? And so injustice is going on all around us, right under our noses, but we just walk on by. And actually, this is an outdated image here. In a new one, everyone would have a phone out, videotaping this. Right? Recording it. So they can post it. How much worse is that than just walking by? What have we become? Right? Now, Jesus, the way he lived, the way he said to treat people, this was not ethical. I mean, it's ethical, of course, and it's become embedded in us as ethical because the world has so embraced Christianity without even realizing it. Even the people that denounce Jesus and God follow these principles, right? And that was an amazing achievement. But this stuff is theological, folks. This is deep theological thing, okay? When you are a victim, obviously that needs to be addressed. God has talked about stepping in, and Jesus has represented that. But when you are a bystander, guess what? You are never a bystander. You cannot be a Christian who is a bystander, right? If someone is suffering, you are suffering. That is the cross, right? If someone is being unjustly treated out there, that is a problem for you. And what is compassion? Compassion is the breakdown of that word is to suffer with, right? That's not just like, oh yeah, my heart goes out to that dude, right? That's not a passive, easy kind of cerebral thing. That is, I am feeling those blows, okay? We are called to completely be compassionate, to empathize, to put ourselves, to feel the pain of the most oppressed. So when someone's getting oppressed, we should be. And if we aren't, where is the cross in our lives? Right? Secondly, the other deep theological thing, if I am not intervening, then I am the perpetrator. Right? If I live in a community or a place where I am letting someone punish someone else, I am pulling that trigger. I am cracking that whip. Right? I am making money off that slave. Right? We cannot divorce ourselves. When we are Christians, we are in the game. There is no more bystanding. Okay? But sadly, that's not the case that we see in reality. And let me tell you, this was very clear to early Christians. If it sounds too impossible right now, right? And if there's any doubt on how seriously the disciples took Jesus' message of put the sword away and step up on the cross and follow me, you just have to look at how the disciples lived the rest of their lives and died. Right? It's no different than Jesus. No different. Right? They did exactly the same thing. Okay, fine, but they were the 12, the 11 now, super special dudes, right? How did the early Christians live? For 300 years, Christians were persecuted, killed systematically by the Romans, who outlawed, by law, it was illegal to be a Christian, right? Systematically burned at the stake, given to lions and animals, made fun of, entertainment, just killed, burnt at night to be lanterns for the city, right? This is the kind of thing for 300 years, not a short sprint. People, families, generations came and went, and we don't have any record of a Christian uprising, right? No armed rebellion. Even when the Jews finally had enough with the Romans and revolted in 66 AD, the Christians separated themselves and came away just so that it wouldn't be confused, right? To ensure. All this time, and what did they achieve? Right? Some estimates say there would be like 7 million Christians at that time, and estimates range of 1 to 2 million could have been killed. So in this group, there would have been many of us who had been executed, right? Now, we don't see any diminished role of enrollment in Christianity, right? And this is part of the paradox as well. These things sound impossible. Like, yeah, people can use all the... You're saying you're not going to use violence. Someone is there killing your family and you're not going to respond with violence? You're crazy, man. That's because they're using the world logic, right? Yeah, I'm crazy if that's what you call it, right? But that's the thing that changes the world. These things that seem logical do not change the world. The crazy stuff does, right? And when Jesus committed to this, he unleashed something, right? We know now there's a woman that has done some research in, she's a professor at University of Colorado. Her name is Erica Chenoweth. And she was someone who studied violence and political movements, right? And she was a firm believer that, yeah, violence is necessary to make real change. And she went to a conference of these nonviolent pacifist people, and she poo-pooed all of them. She was like, no, that stuff really doesn't, it's nice that you're all romantically talking about it, but that really doesn't work. Someone came up to her afterward and said, I challenge you, let's research it. So she's become the preeminent researcher. She studied for hundreds of years different movements to overthrow, right? System. This is like not street violence. This is big system, government level kind of stuff. Apartheid, civil rights in U.S., Gandhi in India, etc. And what she found was that nonviolent movements were far, far more successful than armed movements in creating lasting change, right? Not just the change, but then the kind of change that occurs afterwards, even more powerful, right? And guess what the threshold is for participation? Anyone want to take a guess? Guess what percent of the population needs to participate for a nonviolent overthrow of a system to occur? Anyone want to guess? Anyone? Huh? 20%. Great guess, great guess. Anyone else? Higher or lower? What do you think is that threshold to where the whole of society will change? 5%. They thought it was 5 for a while, and she's done further studies. She's come up with 3.5%. Isn't that crazy? Isn't that crazy? And that, my friends, is the evil one over there, trying to beat down our faith, right? You're never going to get there. The threshold is too high. It's got to be at least 20, maybe 50. What's going to happen? 3.5. And who's the toughest one? The first one, right? And you know how it is if you see, there's like 2 crazy people out there doing something, I'm not going. Oh, wow, there's 15 people out there now, huh? Okay, there's 50. Like, I can blend in real nicely over there now, right? So we'll go and join. So what are we called to? We're called to believe this crazy stuff. That's called faith, right? We sang that song about singing louder than the unbelief, right? When we act like a bystander, we are not acting in faith. We are disbelieving, right? You might have some intellectual cool justification that God exists and Jesus was real, but belief is action, my friends, right? Love is action. That cross is belief, and that cross is love, right? So one of the things I want to challenge us with is, as individuals, and this, I don't want to make it sound like I'm condemning, because my heart was broken preparing for this, because how much injustice I've walked by, it shames me. I can't call myself a Christian with the stuff I've let happen, right under my nose, right before my eyes. And I think it's the same for us, right? I think many of you would share this. Some of you guys have probably been victims. Some of us have been victims of violence, right? But I can say I've not been much of a victim, right? I've had a pretty easy time of it, right? But I'm called to recognize, to seek out, to see where that injustice is occurring, where that violence is occurring, and then to do something about it. And the first thing is we just need to have eyes to see it, because the world is set up to keep it in the shadows, right? And so as a group of community of believers, it's incumbent on us to uncover this stuff. And believe me, this doesn't come without preparation. One thing I was clear to me, you look at Jesus before he started his ministry, what did he do? He went out to the desert for 40 days and just cut off from everything, right? Food, everything, all the other inputs. You think he was just wandering around out there checking out the scorpions and stuff? No, this was prep time, right? How many times when you read the Gospels and Jesus went to go to a quiet place, right? And coming back to Gethsemane. When Jesus went to Gethsemane, before this moment that he was turned in, what was he doing? He was on his face. He was on his face, understanding the cup he was about to drink. Asking God, is there another way? Preparing himself. The cross was horrible, but we know that he stressed so much that blood came from his pores in Gethsemane. When he reconciled this, what he was called to do, and he accepted it. And that, to me, now that I've looked into it, I mean, that had to be the most intense moment. Even all the physical pain of the cross, he had crossed that hurdle in Gethsemane. He knew already then what his destiny was. And if I ask myself, and I have to answer honestly, I've not crossed that. I've not had that tough conversation with God where I've said, yeah, give me that cup. I'm willing to take that cup. I'm willing to wear a cross and actually live what it represents, to go on that cross. So as we break out into groups right now, there's just a couple questions for reflection. And if you want to just go straight to prayer, to lift it up, because I know for me, I need to get quiet and just ask God to open my eyes to the stuff he wants me to start to stand up for, right? And to strip away my fear for all these little tiny things, right? And Christians died, I told you, over 1 million, over 300 years. But it was redemptive, right? It has changed the world. It has absolutely changed the world. So, and then one question about us as a community. I want to challenge us as a community that we should stop being a bystander community, that we should maybe pick a couple of things in particular that we focus on, and as a whole community we address as an injustice. And it might have implications. The church might come under persecution, right? This community. Are we okay with that, right? Are we afraid of that? So right now, I would invite you guys to break into a couple groups to save time, because I know we've run over. So maybe if on this side you can break into 2 groups, and on this side 2 groups, and then I think we have some 5 facilitators in the room. If you guys can go to the back and get out of that group selection process, so that these groups, I'm not going to do any number counting, just kind of turn around and latch on to whoever you want to. And then we'll get a facilitator to come over and facilitate the questions. Yeah? Amen?